2014. Okay, we'll begin with 3 times homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everybody. Okay, so the last time we started Sutta number 122 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is the Mahāsuññata Sutta, which Venerable Nyanamoli translated this as the Greater Discourse on Voidness. But again, as I mentioned, he was translating in the 1950s, and now for sunyata, the word emptiness has pretty much superseded the word voidness. So let's call it the Greater or Larger Discourse on Emptiness. And last time we did the first, roughly the first half of the sutta, in which the Buddha begins by admonishing the monks on the importance of holding aloof from, let's say, gregariousness, from associating too intimately and too often with each other. And instead, he says that the monk shines by see how he puts this. Well, he says that the monk does not shine by delighting in company, by taking delight in company, by devoting himself to company. And then he says it's not possible that a monk who delights in company and so on will ever obtain easily the bliss of renunciation, the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of peace, the bliss of enlightenment. And it's to be expected that when a monk lives alone, withdrawn from society, he will obtain the bliss of renunciation, the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of peace, the bliss of enlightenment. And from the next passage, it appears that what the Buddha means by this is he speaks about a distinction between 2 types of liberation of mind: the temporary liberation of mind, which is identified with the 4 jhanas, or meditative absorptions, and the 4 arupas, the 4 formless meditations. And then beyond that is what is called the perpetual and unshakable liberation of mind. This would be the liberation of mind that comes through the destruction of the defilements. And those are to be obtained when a monk lives alone, secluded, withdrawn, and so forth. And as I pointed out in the last class, there's a certain tension within the Buddha's way of presenting his teaching between the need, on the one hand, the Buddha established a Sangha, that's a monastic order made up of those who live together under rules and regulations. And part of the rules and regulations is for a junior monk, when newly ordained, to remain under a teacher for 5 years, to be living in community, in society, so to speak, in society, the monastic society, to be living under the guidance of a teacher together with elder monks for 5 years, so that one gets acquainted with the training, picks up the protocol of the monastic life, and learns to associate with those who are superior in knowledge and experience. And in general, the Buddha taught for all of his followers, whether monastic or lay people, to associate with kalyana mita, with good friends. That is, with friends who are committed to the training in faith, virtuous conduct, good discipline, learning, meditation, and wisdom. And so it's just like, we could say, our own train of mind, so to speak, is a little bit like, do you know the creature, the chameleon? It's a lizard that changes the color of its skin according to its environment. So if it's hanging out in a cluster of green leaves, then it has green skin. But when the leaves change to, say, to red and brown, then the chameleon will change the color of its skin to red and brown. And so we're similar, we're like that. So the temperament of our minds change according to the company of the people that we keep. So if we hang out with people who are skeptics, who have undisciplined behavior, who scorn wholesome practices like generosity or observing precepts, practicing meditation, before long, even though we think we can remain firm and steady in that company, but almost imperceptibly our minds get influenced by them and start changing. Whereas if we hang out with people who have faith, disciplined conduct, who observe the silas, practice meditation, learn the Dhamma, develop wisdom, their influence will have an impact on us and we'll move in that direction. Okay, so on the one hand, the Buddha emphasizes the importance of right association. In another sutta, I think we're going to come to in a little while, the Buddha compares it to like the training of an elephant. Like when you catch a wild elephant, well, you don't catch wild elephants, I don't think so. But in ancient India, when they would catch a wild elephant, what they do in order to train it is to tie it up next to a tame elephant. And in this way, the wild elephant observes the behavior of the tame elephant, and it starts to quiet down and become gentle, calm, and tame itself. So we connect ourselves to good friends. Our minds might be wild, raging, full of passions and defilements. But when we start associating with good friends, then our minds become like a calm, gentle elephant. Okay, but in contrast, the Buddha also says that to develop the higher attainments, one has to go off into seclusion. If you're always associating with others, even with good friends, one wants to talk, to socialize, and then the mind doesn't devote itself to training. Okay, so then after emphasizing the importance of going into seclusion, then the Buddha gives advice to the monks on how they should train their minds to abide in voidness or emptiness internally, externally, to enter into the imperturbable states. Those are the formless meditations, internally, externally. And as I pointed out, what's important in each of these sections is the concluding phrase of each section. Whatever happens, the Buddha says, in this way he has full awareness of that. And the word translated here, full awareness, is sampajano, which I prefer to translate now as clear comprehension. So whatever happens, even if he doesn't succeed, if he's trying to enter into the meditation on emptiness, if he succeeds, he has clear comprehension of that. If he doesn't succeed, again, he has clear comprehension. When he's trying to enter into the imperturbable states, the formless meditations, if he succeeds, he has clear comprehension of that. If he doesn't succeed, again, he has clear comprehension of that. And so when one has clear comprehension, if one isn't succeeding, then one is able to examine one's own mind or one's own conditions to find out, why am I not succeeding? Could it be something in the environment, maybe a noisy environment, disagreeable people, unsuitable climate, unsuitable food, and if he succeeds, okay, so then, so he comprehends whether it's something external or it could be something internal. I'm letting my mind get carried away too much by thoughts of lust, thoughts of anger, too much sleep, too little sleep, too much outer activity, not enough breaks, overexerting myself. And so by clear comprehension, either of the outer conditions or the inner state of mind, then one could find out what one can rectify in order to be able to achieve one's goals. Okay, so finally, in the passages that we came through last time, the monk is able to enter into voidness or emptiness internally, externally, internally and externally, and also enter into the imperturbable states. So that's as far as we got last time, and this took us through paragraph or section number 10. So now we come to section number 11. Okay, so now this is going to be discussing how the monk, or we could say more generally the practitioner, conducts himself or herself after mastering the attainment and at times when they've emerged from the attainment. Okay, so the text says, when a monk abides thus, if his mind inclines to walking, then he walks, thinking, while I am walking in such a way, no evil or no bad, unwholesome states of mind. These will be states of covetousness or greed or lust, and no states of, I don't like grief here, displeasure, annoyance, irritation will overcome me. Okay, so this is before engaging in the action, one makes the determination, and this is quite important setting the intention. So now the monk is going to come out of the meditation, or he's probably come out of the meditation, and he's now intending to walk, maybe doing a walking meditation. And often what happens, and probably if you look back at your experience, you'll see that this is the case. When one is sitting in meditation over a long time, one might be able to subdue the unwholesome states of mind. But then when one comes out of the meditation and is going to change the postures, there's a kind of interval in which one drops the mindfulness, drops the clear comprehension, and it's a sort of like, okay, I'm free. I don't have to observe the breath or the loving kindness, the thought of loving kindness, or the kasina, or whatever other meditation object, the recollection of the Buddha, whatever. Now I could do whatever I want, I could think whatever I want. Well, one doesn't think like that, but it's sort of the attitude. And then all of those, unwholesome thoughts that were put on the back burner just start coming over the mind, just on that interval when one ends the period of sitting and before one starts getting up and walking away. And so here, in order to prevent that from happening, one sets the intention or makes the determination that, in this case, when I get up and start walking, I won't let these unwholesome states of mind rise up and overcome me. And he does this, again, we see he has full awareness of that. He does that with clear comprehension. And so the text says that when the monk abides thus, if his mind inclines to standing, he stands. If the mind inclines to sitting, he sits. If his mind inclines to lying down, he'll lie down. And again, whatever posture he takes, he makes that determination while I am either standing, sitting, lying down. I won't let these bad, unwholesome mental states overcome me. Okay, so here we have the text is explained in terms of what are often called the four Iryapata, is the term used in Pali. Do you have a counterpart of that in the singular language? Do you have Iryapata in Sinhalese also? Iriau. Yeah, so it's Sinhalese term is based on the same expression. So these are called the four postures, sometimes translated the four modes of deportment. I think this is the Chinese Yi Wei, is that what it is? Wei Yi? Si Wei Yi. Okay, good. Okay, so these, the way I see it, this is dealing with, this section is dealing with activities of the body. So when engaged in activities of the body, before acting, one makes the determination, the intention, and then one acts in accordance with the intention. The next section is concerned with speech. And I guess this was particularly relevant to this situation because at the very beginning of the sutta, when the Buddha came across the monks who were all sitting around preparing their robes, they were probably engaging in a lot of idle chit-chat. Who won the ball game? How did this guy get any hits? Did How did the pitcher do? Did he strike that guy out? Or did you hear the new song by Taylor Swift? Or did you see that new video of, what's her name? Cyrus Miley, is that the name? Miley? Cyrus Miley? Miley Cyrus. Okay, so the Buddha comes on the scene and, what are you talking about? Okay, so now the Buddha gives the advice that when the monk is dwelling thus, if his mind inclines to talking, then he resolves such talk as is low, vulgar, coarse, ignoble, unbeneficial, and which does not lead to disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, peace, direct knowledge, enlightenment, and nibbana. That is, talk of kings, robbers, ministers, armies, dangers, these were the types of subjects of talks that were current, the kind of idle chatter or gossip in the time of the Buddha. Food, well, a lot of them are still current today. Maybe we don't have kings, but instead the talk is of cabinet ministers, we call them cabinet, members of the cabinet, senators, governors, robbers, ministers, armies, dangers, battles, food. Ah, did you taste this food? Do you like that? Oh, that was wonderful, out of this world. Oh, I don't like the food they prepare in this monastery. Let's go out to eat. Where do you want to go? Thai restaurant, Chinese restaurant? Oh, we've never been to an Ethiopian restaurant. Yeah, let's go get Ethiopian food. Oh no, I don't like it, not so good. Let's go to Sri Lankan restaurant. Oh, I was in Sri Lanka for so many years. I've had so much Sri Lankan food. Let's go to Okay, clothing, beds, garlands, perfumes, relatives, vehicles, villages, towns, cities, countries, women, heroes. Who are our heroes today? Oh, we have to have some heroes. I guess sports stars, movie stars, rock stars, like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones. Who are some of the others? What? Fire. Oh, those are the real heroes. Yeah. Okay. Streets. I don't know why that should be. Wells. I mean, that's could be a practical concern. The dead. Trivialities, the origin of the world, the origin of the sea, whether things are so or are not so. Such talk I shall not utter. Well, there goes 99.9% of topics of conversation. Okay, so instead he resolves such talk as deals with effacement. Do you know the word effacement? It's not a very common word. I think it means a limit, sort of removing desires. As talk as favors the mind's release and which leads to complete disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, peace, direct knowledge, enlightenment, and nibbana. That is, talk on wanting little or having few desires, on contentment, on seclusion, on, I'm not sure I like this translation so much, aloofness from society. Because I've looked on the dictionaries or the thesaurus, And the word aloof is now, it's always acquired negative connotations, like being indifferent, cold-hearted, apathetic. But maybe we could render this not getting bound up with, let's say, non-gregariousness might be a better rendering. You know, not being always having to associate with others and get bound up with others. Arousing energy, and then virtue, virtuous behavior, concentration, wisdom, liberation, and the knowledge and vision of liberation. Such talk I shall utter. And in this way, he has full awareness of that. I have to confess that when I read this passage, I often feel guilty. Because so often I engage in the first type of talk, too seldom the second kind. Yeah.
Like when the monastics deal with lay people are always asking silly stuff. But if you know that you're engaging and you're aware of it in a way,
Yeah.
does that make it better or is that acceptable that you're aware that you're, you know, sometimes you have to, I guess, engage the lay people in nonsense. Because we ask all kinds of silly stuff. As long as you're aware of it, is that what the point?
I think what one has to do is, I would say, use ordinary mundane conversation topics as a vehicle or a skillful means for introducing elements of Dharma. You know, so it's not, I think what's important is not so much the topic itself, but the state of mind in which one engages in that topic. Because one could talk about, okay, I could talk about maybe some of the heroes in the sense of, we could say like, remember the pop music stars of the past? Now they're still alive, but nobody hears of them. That's how impermanent fame and glory are. You know, when they're in their 20s, maybe early 30s, their songs are #1, they're booked up all year round on the concert tour, they're issuing 3 or 4 records a year, and their records are top sellers, and then within a few years, you know, maybe they've become out of the music scene, maybe he has a delicatessen, he's running a former top rock star, he's now running a delicatessen, or he's working as a mailman delivering letters.
He realizes emptiness every time he reaches into his pocket.
Yeah. You know, so this is how impermanent fame and glory are. Of course, he has a bank account of several $million. Okay, so this section is dealing with speech. And now we come to the next section, which is dealing with the development, or let's say the cultivation of thoughts. Okay, so now it's saying that when a monk abides thus, if his mind inclines to thinking, he resolves such thoughts as are, again, low, vulgar, coarse, ignoble, unbeneficial, and which do not lead to disenchantment and so on, to nibbana. That is, and then here he mentions the 3 sort of characteristic, unwholesome types of thoughts. Thoughts of sensual pleasure, thoughts of ill will, or resentment, or hatred, and thoughts of cruelty, it's thoughts of harming others. Such thoughts I shall not think. And again, he makes that resolve with clear comprehension. And then such thoughts that are noble and emancipating, and that lead the one who practices in accordance with them to the complete destruction of suffering. Those thoughts I will think. And these are the three types of wholesome thoughts. Thoughts of renunciation, that is the giving up of desire or the giving up of worldly pleasures. Thoughts of non-ill will, which is often rendered or glosed as thoughts of loving kindness, and thoughts of non-cruelty or non-harming, which is often glosed as thoughts of compassion. Such thoughts I shall think. And again, this is pretty hard. You know, the mind gets overrun, naturally gets overrun by thoughts, at least of sensual pleasure and ill will. Maybe to few of us we think of thoughts of injuring others. But sensual thoughts, thoughts of ill will, those sort of, even though we make the determination not to think them, but they come up spontaneously and naturally. And so as, say, relatively elementary practitioners, we have to know how to deal with these types of thoughts. And for dealing with these unwholesome thoughts, we have a number of suttas that give guidance, particularly in the early part of the Majjhima Nikaya. Sutta number 19 and Sutta number 20. So I won't explain the methods of dealing with the unwholesome thoughts today, because to get detailed explanations, you can refer back through YouTube, the videos on YouTube to my lectures on those suttas, and they're also on the website, Yu Rong's website, called Noble Path Fellowship. So you can see them there. We have, I think, a couple of classes on each of those suttas. Okay, so these sections, 11, 12, and 13, deal with how the monk who is in training trains himself after coming out from those meditative attainments, or even somebody who doesn't attain them, but who's carrying on in their day-to-day activities, how they train themselves with respect to bodily action through the 4 postures, 4 modes of deportment, through speech, how to avoid wrong speech and engage in right speech, and how to avoid unwholesome thoughts. What are the unwholesome thoughts to avoid, and the wholesome thoughts to cultivate? Okay, now I'll ask, are there any questions at this point? Okay, then shall we move on to the next section? Okay, now what's interesting is that the commentary says that the next section, or actually the next 2 sections, are concerned with the monk examining himself to see whether he has reached the 3rd stage of realization. That is the stage of the non-returner. That is one who has cut off, the non-returner has cut off the 5 lower fetters. That is the fetter of wrong views about the self, the fetter of doubt, and the fetter of clinging to rules and observances. Those are the three lower fetters. And then on top of that, the fetter of sensual desire and the fetter of ill will. And I think the commentary implies that the previous sections can be understood to deal with disciples at the level of either what is called the good worldling, that is the worldling who is training in accordance with the practice, and also disciples at the first two levels of realization, the stream enterer and the once returner. The stream enterer and the once returner have cut off the first three fetters, but they still have sensual desire and ill will. So those tendencies are still there, even in the once returner. But the non-returner cuts off the 5 fetters, including sensual craving and ill will. And since those are the fetters that tie living beings to the sensual sphere of existence, the non-returner doesn't come back to the sensual sphere, but will take rebirth, usually in the form sphere, and achieve final liberation from that realm. Okay, and so since the non-returner has eliminated sensual desire, so one way in which the person in training can test to see whether they've reached the stage of non-returning is by examining to see whether the connection with sensually enticing objects will have any impact on the mind, cause any kind of, even a very subtle disturbance in the mind. Okay, so this is the way the text continues. So the Buddha is speaking, again, he's speaking to Ananda, so he says, Ananda, there are these 5 chords of sensual pleasure. Actually, I think the word chord here is a little misleading. It was used by Venerable Nyanamoli. I don't know why he used it. But I would say simply just 5 objects of sensual pleasure. And what are the 5? They are forms, that's visible forms, sounds, odors, tastes, and tactile sensations, which are described as wished for, desired, agreeable, likable, connected with sensual desire, and provocative of lust. Okay, then the Buddha says, here a monk should constantly review his own mind thus. Does any mental excitement concerning any base, that's any object among these 5 objects of sensual pleasure, ever arise in me? Okay, if on reviewing his mind, the monk understands mental excitement concerning anything among these 5 objects of sensual pleasure does arise in me, then he understands that I have not abandoned desire and lust for the 5 objects of sensual pleasure. It doesn't mean that when the monk comes into contact with the objects of sensual pleasure, that actual desire and lust have to arise in him. Sometimes, thoughts of desire, craving, lust don't arise, but there's just a little bit of kind of excitement or an interest arises. Like I knew a monk in Sri Lanka who was a meditation teacher, and his mind was always, he always felt that his mind was so calm and so pure that he thought he had actually reached the stage of non-returning. But he noticed that when young women came to see him, he didn't have thoughts of lust or desire, but after they would leave, there would be just a little kind of residue of excitement in the mind, which would take some time to sort of settle down. And from this, he realized that he wasn't a non-returner. Okay, so this is well, that's the first part of the passage. But then the Buddha continues, but if on reviewing his mind, the monk understands no mental excitement concerning any object among these 5 objects of sensual pleasure arises in me, then he understands desire and lust for the 5 objects of sensual pleasure have been abandoned in me. And in this way, he has full awareness of that. I'd have to say that this requires some qualification and some further explanation. I'd say it's no guarantee that when one reviews one's own mind and one doesn't find any mental excitation, therefore you could conclude, I've permanently abandoned desire and lust for the 5 objects of sensual pleasure. And for this, there's a story, I think it comes in the Visuddhimagga. It's based on the ancient tradition that came down in Sri Lanka. There's a mountain in the southeast of Sri Lanka called Chitalapabbata, and it's a mountain to which monks used to go for retreat, for intensive meditation. And there was one monk who went there. His name was Venerable Dhammadina. He went there and practiced over a long time, and while there he achieved arahatship. And then he was wondering, has my teacher achieved arahatship? And he sent his mind, he developed the iddhis, the supernormal powers, and he sent his mind out and he saw that his teacher was still a worldling, even though he hadn't achieved any stage of realization, even though, because he had very strong samadhi practice, and probably he had reached various stages of insight knowledge, he had thought that he was an arahat. So Dhammadina thought, let me help my teacher. So he went to visit his teacher. He bowed down and paid respects to his teacher. And then he said to his teacher, he told him that I've been practicing in seclusion and I've achieved arahatship. Then his teacher said, wonderful, wonderful, Dhammadina. Then Dhammadina said, when did you attain it? Then his teacher said, oh, I attained it in such and such a year, so many years ago. Then Dhammadina said, did you gain the supernormal powers also? The teacher said, yes. Then Dhammadina said, okay, then can you please create the form of a beautiful girl? I think in those days it would say 16 years old, but maybe now that's not legal, so let's make it so that nobody will report on me and get me arrested. Let's say 18 years old with beautiful, well, we can't say blonde hair, this is in Sri Lanka, flowing black hair, dressed very beautifully with rather light clothing, and with a very beautiful smile and twinkly eyes, and have her come walking towards you with a flashing smile. And so the teacher did that, and suddenly Dhammadina said to the teacher, why is your face turned red? Then the teacher realized that he hadn't achieved what he thought he had achieved. And then he said, please, Dhammadina, teach me. Then Dhammadina taught him meditation, object, and then the teacher went off into his cottage and practiced. And it's always a very quick and happy ending in the stories. And then I think within one sitting or on the same day, he achieved arhatship. Okay, so the point of this story is that just because when you're alone and you examine your mind and you don't find any trace of sensual desire, don't jump to the conclusion, therefore I'm a non-returner. To confirm it, one would probably have to test oneself by going out into a busy place or discuss one's practice and realization with a knowledgeable teacher. Okay, so this section, 14 and 15, are concerned with the way to test, or at least a possible way to test, the attainment of the third stage of realization, that is, the stage of non-returning. But even the non-returner still has subtle defilements remaining, and one of these defilements is called asmi mana, which is the conceit I am based on the 5 aggregates. And so when one moves from the stage of a non-returner to the stage of arhatship, one does so by eradicating the conceit I am. Okay, so now the Buddha is going to explain how one uses this as a test for the attainment of arhatship. Okay, so the Buddha says, Ananda, there are these 5 aggregates subject to clinging. In regard to these, the monk should abide contemplating rise and fall, thus such as material form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness, such its arising, such its passing away. So this is the knowledge of arising and passing away in regard to the 5 aggregates. And the knowledge of arising and passing away is, in a nutshell, what kind of contemplation in terms of the 3 characteristics. Right, anicca or impermanence. So this is seeing the subtle impermanence of the 5 aggregates, that they're constantly arising and passing away. And so when he abides contemplating rise and fall in these 5 aggregates subject to clinging, the conceit I am based on these 5 aggregates is abandoned in him. Okay, when that is so, then the monk understands the conceit I am based on these 5 aggregates subject to clinging is abandoned in me. And in that way he has full awareness of that. It seems that a section is, or at least some sentences are left out here which should have been here. That is, that the monk examines himself, and if he sees that he still has some conceit I am based